Hello, my name is Catalina Marulanda. I work at the World Bank, where I currently manage the Urban, Resilience, and Land Unit in East Africa. I'm a civil engineer with a PhD in geotechnical engineering. I started working at the bank in 2001, focusing on brown environment issues like waste and pollution management. I have worked in Latin America and in South Asia over the past decade and a half. And for the past 2.5 years, I have been working in Africa, looking at urban resilience issues. At the bank, we work with governments and with the private sector on financing programs that make cities more productive, more resilient, and more livable through investments, through policy dialogue, and through technical assistance. Around the world, cities are drivers of economic growth, and therefore they are central to this discussion of the green economy. Cities are particularly important in the context of Africa because it is estimated that about 70% of the GDP of African countries is generated in cities. And this share will continue to increase as urbanization increases. On the other hand, the population in Africa is growing and urbanizing much faster than the rest of the world. In fact, the population in Africa will double between today and 2050. And about 2/3 of the new people, will be living in cities. This means that more than 650 million people will move to cities in Africa in the next 25 years. This is a huge number of people, and they will be doing this movement that will be moving to cities very, very fast. So if this movement is well managed, it's a huge opportunity for African countries and African cities to generate economic growth and to drive development. So for African cities to capture the potential that is brought by this urbanization, they must work properly. They must be well managed and well planned so that they can harness this concentration of people, of economic activity, that they can provide access to opportunities, to services, and to jobs. But however, what we have been seeing in Africa over the years is that that cities are not growing in a planned way. They are growing with high levels of informality and with huge gaps in infrastructure and service delivery. And what has happened is that infrastructure investments have not kept up with the increase in population. To give you a sense of the infrastructure and the service provision gap, roughly 70% of the urban population lives in slums today. About 35% of households has access to piped water, and about 25% of the population in urban areas uses a flush toilet. Less than half of the solid waste that is generated in cities is collected, and more than 70% of what is collected is burned or just disposed in the environment. And finally, roughly only 1/3 of urban inhabitants have access to electricity. So what we see in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, is that the urbanization that we have seen over the past decades has not led to the expected boost in the economy and in living standards that we have observed in other regions. And at the same time, to make things worse, the risks from natural disasters and are increasing and are being exacerbated by climate change. What we know from data from the past 20, 30 years is that the frequency of floods, for example, which affect all African cities multiple times a year, has jumped tenfold relative to what we observed in the 70s. And because cities concentrate so much population and so much assets, they also amplify the impacts from disasters. So the annual economic losses from disasters and the cost of recovering from those disasters have increased dramatically in the past decades. And the losses from those natural catastrophes drain and severely impact fiscal resources. And often we have seen that they set back development gains because investments to recover on that take away from investments in education and health and in other things. So for all these reasons, supporting cities in Africa is central to ensuring a more sustainable and a more resilient urbanization trajectory for Africa, and therefore a steadier and greener economic growth. At the global level, the financing gap for urban infrastructure, is very large. It is in the order of $4.5 trillion per year. This is enormous. Most of this gap is in developing countries because where cities are growing the fastest. So accessing large volumes of financing for urban infrastructure and for resilience in developing countries becomes increasingly challenging. At the World Bank, what we're doing is we're working with national and with local governments to help mobilize financing in cities by strengthening institutional capacities and strengthening national systems to have access to innovating financing solutions and to more financing for urban infrastructure. We invest about $5 billion every year at the bank in urban development and resilience projects to help cities meet the critical demands of urbanization. More broadly, if you look at the bank overall, we are financing about 44% of our overall financing is going to support climate projects by the end of 2025. This is roughly $40 billion overall every year to address the growing need caused by climate change and to promote low growth carbon. But the huge financing needs for urban infrastructure cannot be met only by development assistance, which only together all of the development assistance per year is in the order of $225 billion a year, which is much, much less but what is needed currently. So lots need to be done in addition to development assistance to raise the resources needed for urban infrastructure. And what we do at the bank then is to boost financing from local governments to really increase this financing that cities can do themselves, increasing access to private and commercial financing for cities, and promote innovative forms of financing. And as I said before, we support national governments, both national and local governments, to adopt policies and regulatory frameworks that will make it possible for cities to borrow responsibly, to improve their domestic revenue mobilization efforts, and to attract private sector investments. There is a tremendous level of effort across the region to increase financing resilient infrastructure in cities. Many countries that we work in are focusing on this and are doing really great things. The focus is on building resilient infrastructure, not only to withstand the disasters of today, but those that are expected in the future under increasing climate targets. For example, we are working now with governments in Tanzania, in Mozambique, in the DRC, in Malawi, just to name a few. We're working across the region. But in these governments, through projects that we are financing, we are creating the right conditions to increase this financing at the local level, the revenue mobilization at the city level, to finance urban development, with very interesting results, for example, in the areas of urban flood management, which really is affecting African cities every year. There's a lot that keeps me excited about the urban resilience sector. Perhaps if we consider everything that I've been talking about right now, perhaps we could say that the urbanization trajectory of African cities is a little bit off skew, but it's not too late. The important thing and really what keeps us all energized is that it's not too late. There is about 2/3 of the urban infrastructure in African cities that will remain to be built in the next 25 years. So the opportunities to support cities and to leverage the opportunities that are being brought by urbanization are tremendous, and it is the right time to do it and the right moment. And there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of ideas of innovation, and this gives me energy. I had the pleasure to chair a panel last year at the conference that discussed ways to improve solid waste management in African cities, which is a topic that is very much related to the topic of this year, sustainable and green and resilient cities. It was a very interesting panel, a very interesting discussions, and it was great for me to hear about the experiences of stakeholders from every side of the table. That included a city government, a private sector CEO, there was a leading NGO, a representative from a trade organization, and a regulator. And they all brought different perspectives and experiences to address the same problem, which was improving solid waste management. So I think that meeting, that discussion, not only brought to light all of these experiences, but it helped raise awareness to the audience of the urgency and the complexity of the problem of solid waste management, and also on practical ways that cities can and governments in general can do to partner with private sector and with civil society to tackle the challenge of solid waste management. This event is exciting and really important precisely because it brings together diverse audiences, including mayors and city government officials, policymakers, financiers, private sector, donors, and city networks. And this provides opportunities to share experiences and lessons, to learn about what is known about urban infrastructure financing, about disaster preparedness and risk reduction, and to support knowledge exchanges on issues related to green and resilience growth. I think it's important to note that urbanization needs to be seen as an opportunity. It is not a problem, it is a huge opportunity for Africa. And if properly managed, urbanization in Africa can really drive structural transformation and create livable cities that will continue to be drivers for resilient growth. So the connections that are made at this event and the exchange of experiences between countries and cities facing similar problems and similar challenges will be hugely beneficial and will allow participants to build on the existing knowledge to tackle challenges that are common more efficiently. Perhaps one last word to say that it's very important to understand that the policy and the investments, the choices that are made by African cities today will lock them, not only will spend the resources today, but it will also lock them into patterns of urban development for the next decades. And it will be very costly and very difficult to change those patterns in the future. So it really is important to act now and to change that trajectory. The stakes are quite high, as we discussed, but there is a very good window of opportunity. There's 25 years of continuous growth where this pathway can be changed, and we can set cities, or we can help set cities in Africa on a path to greener and more resilient growth.